In this video, I'd like to describe some really unconventional ways to make sounds, but they may be sounds that are useful to you, so let's go ahead and run through some of these. The first thing I'd like to describe is let's go ahead and make some, let's say, a record crackle noise or static noise, because often when people are trying to make new material but make a sound vintage, they want that kind of vinyl feel to it. So one trick we can do is let's go ahead and turn our overdrive all the way up in the filter section. We're using a low pass filter with the cutoff all the way up and the resonance all the way down, so it doesn't really matter. The filter's not playing a part in this at this point. For oscillator C or wave C, we're going to select noise as our source, and we're going to just vary this wave level for C to define the actual crackle or noise for our sound here. So as we increase this, let's go ahead and do that. We're getting nice little pops and clicks at random intervals that imitate scratches or dirt on a piece of vinyl you may have. As we increase this, the number of scratches that are occurring are increasing. Until we get more of just a static sound, which is quite a bit different than just standard noise. Let's turn the overdrive down. This is our noise as it would normally sound. Let's go ahead and turn that down and our overdrive back up. And you're hearing us introduce that overdriven crackle to the noise itself. Now if we really crank this up, notice that we get a lot more tone out of the noise than when it's not being overdriven. Again, we'll overdrive that. So look at the range we've got there with just this volume control and a mixture of the overdrive. We can go from crackles to a fuller noise sound, all the way up into a thin noise sound. So that just demonstrates kind of the unique capabilities of this overdrive control, plus the way that the overdrive control, the pre-filter overdrive, works in the mixer section. So this can boost the signals and kind of warm it up going into the filter, and this is really a level control. The overdrive is really sensitive to the levels coming into the filter. For instance, let's go ahead and turn our overdrive all the way up, and now we're going to play with oscillator B. We're going to select a sine wave. For instance, I'm going to start with the overdrive turned all the way down, bring up our sine wave, and we've got just a single tone there, just a fundamental frequency. Not much interesting happens when we move that cutoff frequency, but as we increase the gain here and start overdriving the input of that filter, our sine wave shape is going to change and add more harmonics. Now when we adjust our cutoff frequency, we'll have more change to the tone. And we can overdrive that sine wave, plus add a little resonance. Let's back this off a little bit so we get some resonance in there. And you'll notice right here, we're right on the tipping point. If we back off, the filter's going to start oscillating because of the resonance, but if we increase it, we hear less resonance because we're overdriving the filter too much. There's a nice little balance point right there. Let's play a lower sine wave. And find that balance and dial in the resonance just right to where the chaos wants to happen. And now, well, let's actually let me take a different approach here. What I really wanted to show you was we can take our special insert cable, our stereo send return cable, plug it in, wave B, and that gives us the envelope controlled portion of that waveform on the ring. So let's go ahead and plug that to the audio input. We're going to turn up we're going to select external for wave A, so we'll be listening to just the sine wave of oscillator B being shaped by this envelope. We're going to set a nice decay time, bring up our sustain a little bit, so even after it gets done decaying, it's not going all the way to the bottom. And now listen to what happens. We can hear this is actually controlling the volume of our sine wave going into the mixer. But we can use that technique in conjunction with overdriving the input of the filter to shape how the sine wave is overdriving the filter. In addition, let's go ahead and back this down and now bring up our overdrive and slowly increase this level and listen to how this tone changes. So it starts out being a very thin sound. It gets fatter. Let's just leave our cutoff frequency all the way up so we know the filter's not doing anything here. Now let's bring up our decay time. That makes for a pretty interesting sound considering we're just using a sine wave, which is a fundamental frequency. It doesn't have any harmonics itself. The harmonics are being generated by overdriving the input of the filter in the shape of this envelope. So we still haven't even used the envelope to really shape the tone of that sound other than overdriving that signal once it gets out past the actual filter itself. Bring up the resonance in the filter. And this is where I was headed with my previous thought, is now we're going to go ahead and increase the resonance and try to find that fine little breaking point of where we're saturating the filter with overdrive, plus the filter's kind of on the verge of breaking into resonance but isn't, because there we start to get some really interesting feedback type sounds. And it just takes small little adjustments here. You want to play with your level control and your resonance. Just find that nice little balance there. And we can introduce a little bit of envelope shape as well. Now that's a pretty crazy sound, but let's go a step further. We've got, again, this sine wave going out, shaped by the envelope, coming back in the audio input and being our external signal for oscillator A. We can then modulate oscillator B with waveform A, which is oscillator B shaped by the envelope, and we'll increase the amount, and you'll hear we can get some more chaotic sounds right about here. So that's pretty crazy, but it's not very musical. It's kind of, you know, the oscillator is modulating its own frequency. which isn't giving us something stable. So let's go ahead and switch on the oscillator sync. And even though we've got external selected for oscillator A, the sync circuit always gets its frequency based on the true waveforms of oscillator A. So that'll keep oscillator B's frequency stationary even though it's modulating itself. And we can play with our envelope times. So you're getting a lot of stuff happening in that one simple little sound. Remember, we're just listening to a sine wave. Okay, another interesting thing I'd like to point out about envelopes. Let's simplify our sound here for a minute. Actually, let's just even remove all of our sound here from the mixer. We're going to turn our overdrive down and turn up the filter. In fact, I'm just going to unplug this. Clear out our envelope here. So here we just have the filter self-oscillating. Let's introduce the envelope to sweep the filter just to show you what its shape is doing to that filter cutoff. So the envelope is starting low, going high at the rate of the attack, going down at the rate of decay to the level of sustain, and then when we release the note, that level of sustain decays to the release or the zero level again. Something interesting a lot of people don't know about typical ADSR envelopes is when you adjust this sustain level, let's go ahead and do that. So now it's gone up the attack time, down the decay time, and it's resting at 0. But now that I'm holding a note, I can adjust the sustain level and it changes. But notice the rate of change is slewed, and that's due to the glide time here, or not the glide time, the decay time. So if I go ahead and decrease this decay time, notice how much more responsive the sustain is. It's very fast, but if I increase the decay time to a very large setting or a slow time, watch what happens when I make large adjustments to the sustain amount. So that's something interesting you should keep in mind, and a technique that you can use when you're playing envelopes, so that even though a sound, let's say the decay portion has already happened, you can still play that sound depending on where that decay is set. So if you want to slow, so again, let's go slow all the way up. Or we're going to go down, slow. Now that it's decayed, we can bring that level back up at the rate of the decay. But we can change that. We can change that rate while it's moving by adjusting the decay knob. Now, let's show you something else interesting. We've got this filter, or the filter set up. We're going to remove the envelope. So again, our filter is self-oscillating, but let's back this up so the filter isn't quite oscillating due to the amount of resonance. Back that off. Alright, and now the filter is no longer self-oscillating. This little trick, we're going to take the envelope out and plug it into the audio input, just to show you you don't have to run just audio frequencies into this mixer and the filter to get some interesting results. If you're familiar with a lot of the early drum machines, even the TR-808, they used a type of filter that was a ringing filter, and that's what produced the sine waves for the bodies of the drums. And what they would do is have those filters tuned just so they were just about to self-oscillate, and then excite those filters by injecting a small little pulse into the input of that filter, and that's what we're going to replicate here. So we've got our envelope plugged into the audio input. Let's go ahead and select external for oscillator A and bring up this tiny little pulse. We've got the attack, decay, sustain, and release all set to their smallest times. So with this level down, the filter's not oscillating, but as we start to excite that filter, now we can hear it start to pop a little bit. And notice I've got the key follow turned up here, so as I play different notes on the keyboard, this cutoff frequency is following it, which changes the pitch of the tone. So we've got just a simple little sine wave, and you can see I've got the release turned all the way up, so the decay is actually being, the resonance is responsible for the decay time. So if we back this off a little bit, our sound should get shorter, and it does. If we increase the resonance, the decay time should get longer. Now let's try overdriving the filter a little bit with that envelope pulse. And we can hear the click of that sound changes in tone. And we could even add a little envelope here to sweep the frequency at the same time. If we want, we could go ahead and select the attack and decay time for a simple percussive envelope. That's got a little bit too much click, so I'm going to bring that back, and we can play with our decay time just a little bit. If we go too far, we get too much AC signal in here to really excite the filter the way we want to. So let's bring that back so it's a nice little pop. Now let's go ahead and introduce a little bit of noise into that using waveform C. And turn on our arpeggiator and have a little tune going. So that's a neat way you can make simple little bongos and stuff that represent some of the early little preset drum machines. Another neat trick you can do, let's say you like to play a noisy type sound, like, let's bring up our noise here. I mean, to really pitch noise, we can add resonance, or we can select a bandpass and play that up and down, the keys up and down the octave to kind of change that cutoff frequency to focus more on a different band of noise. But really, that's just changing the tone a little bit. It's not really pitching the noise. One trick we can do is we can, again, let's start with a sine wave for oscillator B. And now we're going to remove that resonance, turn up our cutoff frequency, and set our filter type to low. So now we've just got a simple sine wave. What we're going to do now is, since we have noise assigned to C, let's go ahead and select wave C to modulate oscillator B. I'm going to go ahead and select this so I get a longer time, you can hear it. And let's select a higher frequency. So there you can see, by taking just a fundamental frequency, say from oscillator B, modulating it with noise, that adds randomness to that fundamental frequency, but it still allows us to play that fundamental frequency up and down the keyboard to get more of a perceived pitch of that noise. Ah, I see. I was wondering where we were getting that buzzing from. We've got oscillator sync on here, so let's go ahead and remove that. Now we'll get more of a pure sine noise. So that's going to give you a different result than if we just use bandpass and noise by itself. Or you can use the two in combination. Another neat thing I'd like to show you is how we can make kind of metallic sounds. We already know we can frequency modulate the oscillators or ring modulate them to get those metallic sounds, but let's go ahead and start with a low frequency sine or sawtooth and bring it. Actually, let's use oscillator A, because I'm going to use oscillator B as my modulation source. Switch our filter type to low pass, bring up our cutoff frequency and resonance for now. Go ahead and get this low octave. And now we're going to shape our filter sound. So there we've got just a typical bass, simple bass line sound. But the trick here is we've got a little bit of resonance, we've got a low cutoff frequency. Now let's use wave B, which is oscillator B, to modify the frequency of this filter. And a lot of interesting things can happen, I mean, depending on how we tune this oscillator. Let's go ahead and introduce that modulation. Now if we select the same waveform, now we're getting these phasing type sounds based on how this oscillator is tuned compared to that one. And you'll get different results depending on the waveform you choose. Let's choose square. And triangle. So it is almost giving us an LFO effect, but adding a phase effect due to the phase alignment of oscillator A and oscillator B. Let's go ahead and listen to the sine wave. Just a little bit smoother. But the trick really I want to show you to get those metallic sounds is let's go ahead and shift this octave up to a higher register. There we go. Set our cutoff nice and low, resonance turned up. So that sounds kind of like an old video game or just a child's toy. Let's go ahead and increase the envelope a little bit. And again, we can add a little bit of attack time, and now we're starting to get more vocal sounds to it. Something else we can do is we could select B envelope in our modulation section, and what that does is it takes this waveform, shapes it with this envelope before sending it to this source. So let's go ahead and remove this envelope amount because we have already got this shaped by it. And again, we can play with the tuning of this oscillator or the octave. And select different waveforms. Square wave really gives us the most pronounced effect though. Now we can, even though this oscillator is being shaped by the envelope, we can also add this envelope in positive or negative amounts just to give a little different effect. And you're probably thinking, why would I want to use this envelope shaped with the regular envelope amount? What you're doing is you're getting a sine wave, or actually a square wave here, in the amplitude shape of this envelope in the positive polarity. But here we're introducing that envelope in the negative polarity. So the envelopes are kind of canceling out, but the actual frequency in the waveform is still being allowed to modulate that. So you hear less envelope sweep when we use this negative amount, but still get that tone variation. So that's just another neat way you can do some really cool stuff with the excess. Hopefully you learned some new things today and can go try them for yourself. Thanks.